So during my last video, I said a bit of a throwaway line. Magic in Daggerfall is really strong, arguably overpowered, and I thought it would be fun to demonstrate what I mean. I figured the easiest way to do this would be to take almost the exact same build, but remove our limiters and actually allow us to cast spells naturally. For this build in particular, I want to show off how close Pleads for Mercy was to being an extremely powerful archmage. Elder Scrolls has a storied history of magic breaking the games. I imagine anyone viewing this is familiar with Morrowind's alchemy or Skyrim's restoration loop. Oblivion has things like stacking 100% damage or spell reflect. Point is, there's a lot of ways to become overpowered in the Elder Scrolls. Daggerfall is, of course, no exception to this. So here's what we're working with. Our skill choices and stat allocation is still the same as they were before, but this time we're actually going to make use of our genius level intelligence. Our advantages are the same as before: increased magery 3x, spell absorption, regenerate health, rapid healing, athleticism, and adrenaline rush. Our disadvantages have changed slightly. The loss of our biggest disadvantages frees up a lot of space, and I decided that it would be best to give ourselves some other disadvantages in lieu of them, in order to try and further show just how strong magic really is, and also to help reduce the amount of grinding I may end up needing to do. Low tolerance shock is now critical weakness shock, and I've added low tolerances to poison, disease, and paralysis. Note that at this point, I don't consider this a bad build anymore. It's more like an unoptimized glass cannon. The fact that we have the option to cast spells makes it infinitely stronger than Timu Rincewind from last time. No, I haven't read Discworld, but I got a surprising number of comments saying that I had made a lizard version of a character from the books. Anyway, as we begin a new Kalpa cycle, the gods decide that this time, Pleads for Mercy will be able to cast the spells he so diligently studied. This time, he wouldn't be the one pleading. We answer our career quiz. This time, I didn't put too much thought into it, but if you're curious what it ended up giving us, here it is. The only part of this that I think is really significant is the plus 12 to destruction, because it will reduce the amount of training that I bother doing for it, and it'll also allow us to get our stronger spells a little bit earlier. Our final stat roll will be similar. I'll still keep agility and endurance and willpower low, but it really isn't going to matter. I also plan to do the low roll stat amount on level ups again, so we'll be gaining 36 points to spread across these numbers. But honestly, with our intelligence already maxed out, I'm not super concerned about where we're putting them. Probably just gonna make him likable or something. I may have ragged on Argonians a tad when I said they have the worst racial bonuses in Daggerfall, but all races are equal when they achieve Chim. Pleads for Mercy II receives his quest from his best friend forever, the Emperor Uriel Septim VII, and makes way for Daggerfall. After getting washed aground in Privateer's Hold, we begin our adventure. So we start off by zapping some of the local wildlife before we head to Daggerfall again to rejoin the Mages Guild. We're going to be shotgunning the main story again, so this song and dance should be familiar. We get to level 2 and I decide to take out just one loan from Daggerfall, and this Kalpa cycle, we shouldn't be dodging collections mages that will no doubt be employed by Gothrid and his wife. No, instead we're going to do something that almost no Daggerfall players ever do. We are actually going to pay back a loan. I know, shocking stuff going on here. Just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through these quests. So we take out our loan, exactly 50,000 septims to use. We won't really be needing them the way that we did before. I don't intend to be hunting Daedric artifacts, and we'll be gaining at least some levels from casting spells during dungeons, but we do want to use the Spellmaker for obvious reasons. For now, I'm just going to use some of the default spells, the ones that you can buy from your fellow Mages Guild members. I figure we should demonstrate how strong magic is naturally before we break the game over our fucking knee. I think we'll give it until about level 6 before we do anything too broken. So we'll buy a few spells here, get to level 3, and while I deal with the beginning of the main story quests, I'll go over some stuff related to magic. So in addition to the spells Shock, Chameleon, and Slow Falling, which started the game in our spellbook, we're going to add a few more to our repertoire. We're picking up Recall, Cure Disease, Cure Poison, Free Action, Ice Storm, and Fireball. Our primary attacks at first are going to be Fireball and Ice Storm. This is primarily on the off chance we run into any enemies that resist one element or the other. It's important that we choose these spells specifically because of how they target. I'm going to go more into this later when we create our first spells, but the important thing is that these are area at range. Basically, these explode after impact, meaning it can hit multiple enemies at once. But Rag, I hear you cry. Look how much magicka it costs to cast Fireball. Even at 300 magicka, you can only cast it 6 times, and its damage is far less than something like Shock or Ice Bolt. Not to mention you have to keep your distance, lest you damage yourself in the tight corridors of Daggerfall's dungeons. Ah, but you see, young Chadawan, this is only true if you forget one very important detail of our build. You see, we took the advantage spell absorption. And that means not only will we avoid damaging ourselves if we are hit with our own spells, we'll get refunded the magicka spent to cast it. This means that we can spam any destruction spells that use area at range. This is going to be a key component of how our somewhat weak pre-configured spells manage to clear the entire way to the King of Worms. And, just to flex, I'm also going to ignore Nulfaga's statue and find the normal way there for when you don't know the password. I'm actually glad that I did this because it sheds a very important light on what is going to end up being our biggest weakness. Silence. Every single one of the spellcasters in here wants to silence us, and as long as we're silenced, we won't be able to cast any spells. This is a problem, obviously, but not one we can't remedy with even more magic. We return to Obki and we're given a pair of magical gloves. Now, normally, I would just take these to the Mages Guild and identify them, but that sounds like a pain if I have to do it every time I find a magical item. If only there was something I could do about that. Now we've gotten the very beginnings of our journey out of the way. We're going back to the Mages Guild to get our level 4 so we can blackmail Lord Castellian again. While we're here, we're going to pick up our first few custom spells. It's time for Wizardry 101 with Professor Pleads for Mercy. Daggerfall has 5 ways for a spell to target. We went over area at range when we talked about Fireball and Ice Storm. Shock, our starting destruction spell, is an on-touch spell. This is effectively a melee spell that will hit one enemy who is up close to us. A good choice if you're strapped for magicka, but limited in how useful they can be. We zapped a few rats and one of Lysandris' ghosts when we came to the city. Second are the spells that are single target at range. If you watched the last challenge, you might recognize the Ebony Blade's Far Silence effect from here. A little better, but it's pretty easy to miss even at mid-range when you're trying to dodge enemy attacks. Then there are spells that affect an area around the caster. I tend not to use these very often, personally, but they can be a good option if you're looking to make a battle mage who doesn't want to be stuck touching each of his enemies. And finally, we have caster only. These target the caster themselves. Duh. This visit, we're going to be making spells from 2 different schools. We're going to start easy. Restoration is an extremely useful school of magic to have access to. First of all, this is where our bread and butter ability, Spell Absorption, exists. If, for some reason, you decided you didn't want to take it during class creation, and RNGesus has not blessed you with an enchanted item, this is the school the effect belongs to. Not to mention, this is where all of the stat buffs are. Feat of Notorgo, Wisdom, Nimbleness. All of these are buffs to our different stats. All useful, but unfortunately, you can't fortify stats beyond 100. Then of course, there's the bread and butter, healing. Heal is a worthless spell effect, at least for your hit points. If you're going to be using restoration for healing, the effect you want to use is regeneration. Take a look at this. This is the magicka cost for a custom heal health spell that will restore Pleads for Mercy II to full health one singular time. 158 magicka at our current level. Absolutely ridiculous. For that much magicka, Regenerate will restore Pleads for Mercy II's health 52 times over. Now, it's important to understand that this works in rounds. A round in Daggerfall is about 5 seconds long. If we take damage, we're not suddenly going to be at full health again instantly, but at the start of the next round, it will happen automatically, provided we didn't die. If you've happened to see my HP tick up from the rapid regeneration advantage we took, it's effectively the same thing, but at much greater magnitudes. The other big thing that the School of Restoration allows is free action. Now, if you've never been paralyzed in Daggerfall, because you're smart and take immunity to it, you won't know that paralysis lasts for a long fucking time. That said, while you aren't able to swing your weapon or move while paralyzed, you can cast spells, and generally speaking, free action is what you're going to be casting. Free action will give you immunity to paralysis for as long as the effect lasts, making it invaluable when fighting spiders, scorpions, ghosts, and other spellcasters. Now, important note, the cost of these spells will actually matter to us. As they aren't destruction spells, we won't be getting back the magicka spent to cast them. This makes it important for us to carefully consider which spells we're even going to be creating. In this case, I'm going to go with a regeneration and free action spell. This will allow us to be immune to paralysis for long periods of time, while regenerating any damage we manage to survive. Bleeds for Mercy II may have power, but he is still extremely fragile. For now. So how do we make a spell like that? First, we'll select our regenerate effect. So what does any of this mean? For this effect, we can choose a duration and a magnitude. The duration is determined by these three numbers. For simplicity's sake, I've created the spell effect I intend to use, but I'll go over exactly what all this means. The leftmost number is the baseline. At 2, the spell effect will always last for 2 rounds before going away. The next two numbers are actually why I love this system so much. At 10 per 2 levels, the spell lasts for 10 rounds longer for every 2 character levels. So when we cast this spell now at level 3, it will last for 12 rounds, or 60 seconds. Once we get to level 4, it will last for 22 rounds, or 110 seconds. Then, at level 6, 32 rounds, and so on and so forth. Essentially what it means is that the spell can scale up with you as you get stronger, a feature that, as far as I'm aware, is unique to Daggerfall in the Elder Scrolls series. Now, we've only covered the spell's duration, but it works exactly the same for its magnitude. The only difference is that instead of selecting a single number, we're choosing a range. The 1-to-1 section means that it will always heal for at least 1. And then we've chosen 12 to 12 per 1 level. That means that currently, at level 3, the spell will heal Pleads for Mercy for 37 points every round. Put it all together, and we've got one kick-ass heal spell. 12 turns of healing 37 hit points, which is more than our current maximum. We're not quite done. Let's add our free action effect as well. For simplicity's sake, I made it the same duration as our regenerate effect. Alright, and that's our first custom spell done. You can see in the bottom left what the casting cost of the spell is. This is how much magicka it costs. Not to be confused with spell cost, which is how much gold you're going to need to pay if you want to make it. I swear I get those confused all the time, it's actually so embarrassing. Hopefully my explanation of how the system works made sense, because now we're going to apply the same information to our second spell. This time, we're going to be using the School of Thaumaturgy. This is the school of magic that would eventually be dropped in favor of conjuration. Thaumaturgy has a variety of effects: charm, detect, identify, levitate, pacify, spell reflection, spell resistance, and water walking. We won't really be able to highlight this school's strengths until a little bit later. We're just going to be using Identify for now because it only uses chance, as there's no need for a duration or magnitude. Chance is always just a percentage. A 100% Identify spell currently requires more magicka than we have, but the cool thing about Identify is that if you fail, you can always try again. Failing to identify doesn't destroy an item. If you want, this means that you never have to pay the Mages Guild identifier ever again. A single cast of the spell lets you attempt to identify any number of items. And it'll tell you how many you successfully identified, so it's okay if it's a little on the expensive side. I made it 10 plus 18 per 2 levels, so that when we get to level 10, it'll be 100%. But, in the meantime, it'll be a bit of a crapshoot. Not that it's going to matter much, since we can just rest and try again if we really want to. Wait, hold on, you might be saying. If all of the spell's effects, its chance of success, its magnitude, and its duration are all based on your character's overall level, then what's the point of leveling your magical skills? An astute observation. The thing that leveling your magical skills does is reduce the cost of spells within that school. A fireball may cost nearly 50 magicka now, but once our destruction skill reaches 60, it will cost a mere 40, and that number will continue to fall all the way until our skill reaches its maximum amount. Alright, equipped with our new spells, let's do some more main quest stuff. We're gonna visit Obki and get told to visit my favorite hole in the ground, Castle Necromogan. This time, we'll remember to set an anchor inside the castle as well. We kill some werewolves and get to test our new healing / free action spell. Enemies are not even close to a problem. Hit them with a few ice storms and they all go down pretty easy. We find a magical cuirass that I identify later as a cuirass of shocking. Neat, but not really useful. While here, I actually found the perfect way to demonstrate how strong our regenerate spell is. This coffin, when touched, will do damage to us. So let's see just how much healing we're getting for our measly 113 magicka investment. A little further along, killing a few more enemies. Anytime we take damage, we heal it off almost instantly. Unfortunately, this leads to me getting a bit reckless and taking a few too many hits from werewolves until eventually...
You dream of the moon and of a man who is less than a man.
Not today, Lycanthropy. If you see this cutscene, you have 72 hours to apply a Cure Disease spell, potion, or visit a temple. Easy for us, since, as you may remember, Cure Disease was one of our first purchases specifically for this contingency. Have you also noticed that it's taking us quite a few spells to deal with most of these enemies? We'll seek to remedy this when we hit 6 and decide we're done playing nice. It's not very Archmage of us to need to cast 3 spells just to kill bats or spiders. In any case, we eventually finally find the letters we're looking for, and we use our teleport to return to the anchor we set before leaving. This spell is one of the ones that Daggerfall veterans tend to talk up as a super useful must-have, and it's easy to see why. Personally, I don't use it that much, but it does save an incredible amount of time when utilized properly like this. We return the letters to Obki and she thanks us for our service. With that, we accept our reward and leave the castle. Back to the Mages Guild for some training, and we're going to make another custom spell. This one will be a very short levitation spell. While we were in Necromogan, I noticed that there were a few holes we couldn't ascend because we couldn't actually touch the walls to climb. Maybe if we'd been a Khajiit with very good jumping, but certainly not as an Argonian who can barely scratch the corners. This isn't a real problem for us. We're going to get a couple of levitate spells. Levitate is useful, no doubt about it, but it's got a fixed movement speed and makes it somewhat annoying if it lasts longer than we want it to. We're going to use 2 different duration levitations. The first will be 2 + 1 per 11 levels. This will be a short one. Since we're going to be going to the Mantella at level 10, it should only ever get us 2 rounds of levitation. This is for those areas that we can see the floor above us, but simply can't climb a wall for one reason or another. The second will be the basic version that we can purchase from our guildmate. It has a duration of 2 + 1 per level. This will get us 6 rounds of levitation at our current level, and should basically always get us up elevator shafts, and has the added benefit of letting us quickly get into cities if we happen to arrive at night. No more climbing the wall for us, simply float over it. As I ascend to level 4, I start to realize, man, this training is getting expensive. I mean, we saw how much it cost to train every level for the worst build ever, and we're already at the point where we're going to have to pay 400 gold per session. If I ever want to pay off this loan I've taken out, I'm definitely going to have to do something about that. If only this was a problem that magic could solve. Real quick, let's go talk to Prince Helseth and blackmail Lord Incest before we hit 5. Yada yada, sensitive nature, set anchor, yada yada, Castellian's nervous, blah blah blah, teleport back to Helseth. It's a simple go there, come back quest that's relevant to the story, but not to our ultimate goal of getting to Aetherius to touch Zurin Arctus' soul. He also gave us a hell of an item by dropping a Steel Frosty Claymore of Ice Storms on us. That's a winner of an item for us, because now we can regenerate magicka without having to sleep. Ice Storm, if you recall, is one of our primary combat spells at the moment, but since this weapon doesn't subtract from our magicka pool, we can simply absorb it directly. Extremely useful. Thanks, Prince Helseth. Now I'm going to show you how to train your magical skills super easily. Yeah, I could have done this as soon as I took out the loan, but like I said, I wanted to show how strong magic could be without completely breaking anything yet. And we won't. Not for another 2 levels anyways. This is going to be particularly effective for this build because we've taken every magical school, but you can apply this to your own build if you've only taken some magical abilities. If you've played Morrowind or Oblivion and ever tried efficiently leveling for maximum attribute increases, then you're probably familiar with creating training spells that you can spam to gain experience in a desired school of magic. This principle works in Daggerfall as well, but what you may not expect is that if you create a custom spell that uses effects from multiple schools, you'll gain experience in all of those schools, every time you cast it. To demonstrate this, I'll create 2 spells. The first will train my Destruction, Alteration, and Thaumaturgy. The trick here is to choose the weakest, cheapest effects in all of these schools and put them into a single spell. Since Destruction is the spell's first effect, we chose this spell to target an area at range. It's important to note, however, that we are not refunded for the entire spell, only the portion of it that we can actually absorb, in this case, the damage health effect. The second spell trains Mysticism, Illusion, and Restoration. Now, I was under the impression that we might be able to absorb the Soul Trap effect, but it didn't seem to be working, so I opted for simply using Open. In any case, these 2 spells can level us up pretty much as far as we want to go. Cast each of them a few times, and bam, that's 6 skill ups in skills relevant to our character's level. If you're familiar with Daggerfall's leveling, you know that we only need 15 skill ups if we want to gain a full character level. Not only is this way cheaper than paying a trainer for every skill up, it's also way faster, both in-game and in our real time. Instead of training 1 skill at a time and having to loiter for 9 hours before we're allowed to do it again, now we can train 6 skills, sleep for as few as 5 hours either at an inn or in a dungeon, and then repeat until we reach our desired level. Not to mention that we can do this up to skill level 100 instead of being stuck at 51. No more paying trainers for us. Again, I want to stress, you can create these spells at level 1 if you want. They're incredibly cheap, not only in gold cost, but also in magicka requirements. The spell absorption we're doing allows us to eke out a few more casts per magicka bar, but it is by no means necessary if you don't happen to have that effect yourself. Alright, level 5. So we showed off how cool Restoration is, Mysticism's Recall spell is a crowd favorite. Let's highlight Alteration next. The big one is Shield. Shield functions exactly like shield effects do in MMOs like Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft. You cast it, and it absorbs the damage you would normally take to your health. These are going to be super useful for Pleads for Mercy II because where his predecessor was all but guaranteed to keel over in 2 hits, he will be able to take quite a few more. And I haven't even mentioned the elemental resistance spells. In the last video, I believe I said that they give us a chance to reduce damage when referring to the Ebony Mail. I was wrong. It gives us a chance to be completely immune to the elemental damage, and if the resistance fails, we still only take half damage. Incredibly useful when fighting Daedra or other spellcasters. Paralyze is also a useful ability, but frankly, I'm of the mind that the best crowd control is death, so I won't be using it myself today. It's a useful spell effect, mind, but it's very expensive, and I think it would be better to use that magicka to kill my target instead. With our new training spells in hand, we're going to buy Shield and the elemental resistance spells from our guildmates and see just how effective they are. We head up to Castle Daggerfall and make for the cook. The cook is going to tell us about this werewolf she wants us to kill. So we'll do that and probably find a diary entry from the werewolf that says she turned him into one because he wouldn't date her friend or something. And here's where I want to try to demonstrate how strong Shield is. Werewolves can do between 1 to 12 damage with their attacks. The version of Shield we can buy from the guild will protect us from 1 to 12 plus 1 per level. So for us at level 5, that's an effective range of 6 to 17 damage. Mind you, the werewolf is level 6, so while it's not an absolutely absurd amount of protection, it's nothing to scoff at either. We'll be able to do better when we make a custom spell for it, but to be honest, our biggest issue is just that our skills are too low, which makes our defensive spells too expensive to use very often. A better build would put more emphasis on our alteration to allow for better shields, but even these mediocre ones are enough to occasionally wall off multiple enemy attacks, and that's even if they're allowed to hit us in the first place, which we attempt to avoid. Alright, so that's that one. Let's talk to Minisera to get her quest, and then we can book it out of here with the guards on our asses. She's gonna tell us about someone who knows the courier's route, and that we can ask him about some shit. Unfortunately, that means we're going to have to be there on the same day as him, so we're going to find out where he'll be, set an anchor there, and then go to Sentinel to find out what's going on with Prince Loten so we can get another dungeoning quest to do. While we're at it, I'd like to highlight another pair of magical schools, Mysticism and Illusion. Now, Mysticism is by far our lowest magical skill, but when facing undead, it is invaluable. Mysticism has the spell effect Dispel for both undead and Daedra. Now, Dispel is a bit weird. When successful, it defeats enemies and doesn't leave a corpse, which obviously causes problems for quests that require you to collect specific items from corpses. Other than that, the spell effects are really expensive, so we won't be able to use them ourselves this time. These effects are a definite must for any would-be paladins or exterminators of demons in the undead. Illusion is a bit trickier. There are technically 7 spell effects for the school, but in reality, there are only 2. Light makes it easier to see in dungeons, though I've never found it necessary to use. In addition to light, the spell effects Illusion has to its name are Shadow Form, Chameleon, and Invisibility, all of which have true and normal versions. Normal just means that if you use a melee attack, the effect is dispelled, whereas true does not. But what's the difference between Shadow Form, Chameleon, and Invisibility? There practically isn't one. In later games, Chameleon acts almost as a passive buff to your sneaking skill. Hell, in Oblivion you can stack 100% Chameleon enchantments and break the game. In Daggerfall, it is an invisibility that only works while you're standing still. Shadow Form is an invisibility that only works indoors, which makes it as good as invisibility for 95% of the time when it matters. But what does being invisible even do for you? It makes enemies not aggro when you go near them. Unless they can see through your invisibility, as many undead are able to do. Honestly, I feel like Illusion got a bit shafted here. In any case, I want to try and show off the invisibility, and I'm going to do it by attempting to get the death certificate without fighting anything, if at all possible. So let's give this a shot, shall we? I note that by the time we actually arrive at Castle Phelan, we only have 8 days remaining to be in Midbury on time, but with the anchor in place, it should be fine to finish this and return to Prince Loten. This portion was actually rather difficult. I wasn't sure of the certificate's spawn location, and had to explore for quite a while before I managed to find it. Despite the fact that there were so many skeletons, which could see through our shadow form, we managed to avoid killing anything ourselves, successfully getting through without resorting to instantly blowing up all of our enemies. We exit the dungeon with 6 days remaining and return to Loten. We tell him about his brother's death. His brother, whose name has changed from Fald last Kalpa to Bev this one. Not gonna lie, didn't realize that this was a name that would change. We get a magical ruby as our reward, which is cool, but when I identify it, it turns out to be for shocking. Less exciting, but still valuable at shops. We teleport to our anchor in Midbury and wait the remaining 6 days to meet the courier. He gives us a ring to take to Minisera to prove his loyalty to the Order. Fantastic. We're making good progress on getting to touch the Underking's soul. Upon returning to Daggerfall, we're notified that our debt is due in 6 months. No problem, we're doing well on quest progress thus far. Return to Minisera, get a letter to give to Gortwog, and immediately get blown up by the guards when I try to leave. Oops, I forgot about that. Anyways, I reload, and this time, when I go to leave, I turn invisible. Damn, should have done that the first time. I decide we're going to get to level 6 before we do Orcish Emancipation. I'd like to do the Elisana's Robe quest. So, I spent a while casting our combat training spell. I'm going to focus on these skills over the others because, frankly, I'd like to get stronger shield and spell shield spells. We haven't spent a lot of time on Spell Shield as it's a thaumaturgical effect, and we haven't really highlighted that school yet. But what's important is that it should stop us from getting silenced so damn often. If it gets cheap enough, I might even use some spell reflection later on. Chalador's Mirror, anybody? The secondary reason is that Illusion, Mysticism, and Restoration are all kinda strong enough even at our current levels. Mysticism has its open spells and recall, and I don't really plan to be using Dispel Undead or Dispel Daedra effects because they don't leave behind any corpses with juicy loot on them. Restoration already restores us to maximum health way more than is probably necessary, and I'm not exactly hurting for any stat buffs. And then Illusion is also a case of it's just good enough as is. For the purposes of this build, we're not exactly looking to be invisible for long periods of time, nor do we really have any difficulty seeing inside the dungeons. So we hit level 6 and make our way to Elisana. As a member of the Court of Wayrest, she's a totally reasonable and trustworthy individual. Not at all the scheming and conniving bitch that her stepmother and step-siblings are. King Eddie sure knows how to pick 'em. So we agree to help her out with our little deal. She wants us to deliver a robe to Lord Incest. Not too hard for us. Another courier quest to some guy we've already met? Cake. So we do it, and shock horror, Lord Castellian has been assassinated. By our hand, no less. What's more annoying are these Daedra seducers that start attacking us as well, and we just can't have that. We get rightfully accused of assassinating the noble, and his guards start attacking us in addition to the seducers. Bit of a tight situation here, but we manage to pull through and get back to Wayrest. Elisana, baby, just make me king and I'll get rid of that troublesome family you've got. She gives us the bracelet she offered as payment, and also tells us that her father, the King Edwir, is very interested in a certain relic called the Totem of Tiber Septim, and apparently has spies all over looking for it, and will almost certainly be needing someone to secure it. Obviously, whoever he chooses will be fabulously rewarded, she tells us. Well, that's something at least. Thanks, Elisana. Maybe I'll return it to Edwir this playthrough. But first, let's get a little wild with our custom spells. It's time we broke our enemy's spirits. We know our destination is the Mantellan Crux, so we need to make sure we craft some spells that are prepared for the kind of bullshit we're going to face there. So, let's start with our defenses. What kind of damage can we expect to encounter in the late game? If we want to make good and effective spells, we must know our enemies. For the purposes of our spell making, we are going to be looking at the highest level enemies. These will be the Ancient Liches and the Daedra Lords. These are the enemies we're going to be looking to defeat, and if we handle them, we should be able to handle basically everything else as well. So what kind of stats are we looking at here? The Ancient Lich easily has the highest damage of all monsters in melee, at a staggering 70 to 100 damage per hit. I think it's pretty safe to say that it'll kill us instantly if we were to take a hit like that. Even at a minimum roll, it still almost doubles our health pool. That means that a shield spell we cast wants to be able to block 100 damage, and ideally for a long time so that we can precast it when we know we're going to encounter something that might actually hit us. Since we know we're planning to precast it, that means we can afford to spend our entire magicka bar on it, since we'll be casting it once and then using our magic sword to restore our resources. A shield spell that uses our entire 300 magicka pool can last for 1 plus 8 per 1 level rounds, and has a potential magnitude of 1 to 1 plus 1 to 49 per 1 level. This means that currently, it'll last for 49 rounds, with a potential shield value of 7 to 294. Now, 294 is a huge amount. Actually kind of an insane number in the context of Daggerfall, but it's also an extreme high roll, and is not something that we can reliably hit. Our average is going to be around 150, which is good for tanking 2 average hits from the Ancient Lich with our current health pool. If we low roll though, 7 shield isn't going to do diddly squat even against the weakest of an Ancient Lich's attacks. So let's even this out a little bit. If we increase the low roll and decrease the max roll, we can keep the spell's cost the same while increasing how reliable it is. Let's instead build a shield spell with a magnitude of 14 to 37. This spell, at our current level, has a range of 85 to 223, with an average of 154. This reliably tanks 1 hit, and has the potential to eat 2, 3 if we high roll shield and they low roll damage. Need I remind you that we are a level 6 character, planning to fight a level 21 monster. What this means is that we should absolutely never ever struggle to face the normal enemies between now and when we actually encounter Ancient Liches. But hey, that's for later. Also keep in mind that we'll be gaining 4 levels between now and then, so that'll be even more to our already powerful shield spell. What about their spell casting? Ancient Liches aren't only deadly in melee, they are extremely scary spellcasters. So while we might not really be worried about them because of our natural spell absorption, we can still get caught with a full magicka bar, leaving no room for the spell to actually absorb, and if that happens, we're going to be in a world of hurt with our many weaknesses. They have access to spells of every element, so we can't rely on having their damage with an elemental resistance. At least, not on a single spell. Instead, we're going to create a spell reflection effect and just let them end hero on us. This one, unfortunately, will have to be unoptimized for now. A duration of 19 rounds is quite a while, but it won't actually be a 100% spell reflect until we get to level 10. Until then, we're working with a 10 plus 9 per level, working out to a 64% chance spell reflect at level 6. For reference, at level 10, Spellbreaker, the Daedric artifact, has a 60% chance to reflect, though admittedly that's permanent and passive, so I'm willing to give it the edge for convenience. Alright, enough about defense. We want to be on the offense anyways, so what kind of damage are we looking to deal? Those Daedra Seducers took a few hits to go down, didn't they? Now, let's take a look at our damaging spells of choice. Ah, I see the problem. Fireball does 1 plus 1 to 7 per 1 level. That means that at our current level of 6, this spell has a damage range of 7 to 43. Fairly respectable. For an amateur, we're going to average about 25 damage per fireball. For reference, the healthiest bats have a maximum HP of 26. So, if we're unlucky, even now at twice their level, we may not one-shot them. Now that is our weaker spell. What does Ice Storm look like? That's the one we've been trying to use more anyways. 1 to 30 plus 1 to 5 per 1 level. That gives us a damage range of 7 to 60. That's a much higher ceiling and pushes our average to about 33 damage. That 60 damage ceiling did allow us to one-shot one of those Daedra Seducers, whose average health is about 86. So a combination of high damage roll for us and low health roll for the Seducer, but still, it happened. In any case, we're going to be basing our desired spells off of our endgame enemies, so what's our target damage? Daedra Lords have easily the most HP, capping out at 210. So that's our goal, and that number is startlingly easy to hit. At 262 magicka, we can create a spell that does 1 to 1 plus 35 to 35 per level damage. That's 211 damage per cast on an area at range spell, so it's spammable if we stay in the proper range. We'll make 2 versions of the potential 5, lightning and magic. Why? because I like them more than fire, frost, and poison. If you're wondering why I don't simply maximize the damage this spell can deal, it's because failing to absorb the spell will suddenly make us extremely vulnerable, as we'll be without magicka. If we have a few points left over, we can try to cast Shadow Form or a free action if we get paralyzed. That lets us try to reposition and potentially rest up, or at the very least use an enchanted item to recover our magicka while laying on a bit of damage in the interim. It's important to note as well that all of our enemies have a chance to resist spells naturally, which, in combination with the occasional hit detection issue, often means we have to cast the spell multiple times. And as we've seen, the base spells that come enchanted on the items are nothing to sneeze at, even if they aren't the comically overpowered nonsense we'd rather be casting. Now there's one more spell I'd like to create, and that's a spell shield. This is a more specific tool that I'd like to be able to keep on hand for those situations where we have to fight other spellcasters and enemies that like to silence us. Our spell absorption and spell reflect effects are extremely useful when facing enemies whose primary means of damaging us is through destruction magic. Against enemies using melee attacks, armed primarily with a silence spell, however, we tend to struggle. What I want is to create a long-lasting, decently powerful spell resistance effect for when we encounter our first couple of spellcasters inside a dungeon. This way we can be prepared for when we encounter them again later on, and hopefully avoid being forced to retreat while we wait for their silence to wear off. This is another one that, like our Spell Reflect, will be unoptimized for now, but it should last for quite a long time before we have to recast it. Alright, now let's take these babies for a test run. We're going to Gortwog and we're going to simply vaporize that one orc that always thinks he's him when the agent walks into the castle. We'll talk to Gortwog, who will inform us that orcs are racist and don't like us before we begin to make our way into the dungeon proper. And let me just say, our damaging spells are amazing. Barring the occasional hit detection issue or resisted spell, we one-shot every enemy that comes our way. Orcs don't deal enough damage to really force us to use our shield spells, so we're simply trying to find the room that houses the letter. We happened upon what appears to be a treasury of some sort that had a lot of gold and alchemical ingredients in it, so we looted as much of it as we could. Once we do find the letter, usually what happens is that we get ambushed by a few orcs. Last time, I ran away. This time, I simply killed them all. All of this while feeling extremely comfortable and not at all at risk. In fact, the only time we died was when we got caught with our pants down and magicka up by the orc shaman again on the way out. As he has now given me trouble on 2 separate runs, I'm going to be naming him Dickhead the Orc Shaman. Congratulations, Dickhead. You earned it. While we were in the dungeon, we picked up a couple of items to identify. One's a flail with a light enchant on it. Lame, but the other is a pauldron of ice storms. Nice, more ways to regenerate our magicka in a pinch. We return to Minnesera and give her the letter so that we can continue with our quest line. With that, we're free to go up to level 7 and begin 2 separate quests. In the meanwhile, we'll receive some threatening and some informational letters. First, we'll get a bit ahead of the curve and travel to Skurg Barrow. We encounter the zombie that Manamarco sends us outside of the lair, so we head in, accept the quest, and set an anchor inside. Just for good measure, and because I noticed them, I decided to kill the ancient liches and ancient vampire in Manamarco's throne room. Exactly as predicted, they died in but a few casts of our spells. Second, we travel to Sentinel, receive a letter from Akarithi after we arrive, and proceed to speak to the Queen. Then, we will brave the dungeon in Sentinel Castle. The enemies, predictably, are not so difficult. And, just to flex, I tried to let the Lich kill himself on me. Unfortunately, it seems he paralyzed himself, and thus I simply put him out of his misery. We shoot the wall a couple of times so we can regenerate our magicka and teleport back to Manamarco. Luckily, the ancient liches have learned where they are on the totem pole, and don't bother trying to attack me. We learn about Zurin Arctus, old news, get a bracer that locks doors, and then proceed to make our way to Wayrest, so we can steal a painting for Queen Akarithi. Finally, we're going to Wayrest for the next quest. Should save us a bit of time for travel, which is important because our loan is still due by Ovank-A next year. So, let's do it, shall we? It takes fucking forever to find the painting. I swear Wayrest's dungeon is bigger than Direni Tower. When we find our way to the painting, the final room gives me a bit of trouble. Turns out that being swarmed on all sides makes life difficult for a mage. Frankly, I should have just stopped being stubborn and cast a shield on myself before entering the room, but I was lazy. Oh well. We give Akarithi her painting, lie to her stupid face because the nobility of High Rock and Sentinel are beneath us and we don't respect them, and then we leave the castle. Now, instead of just going straight to level 8, we are going to go to Direni Tower first and level up in front of Medora if we have to. We're doing this because I'd rather not accidentally overlevel if I can avoid it. And I'm not gonna lie, with 5 quests that require us to be level 10, I'm not confident we won't accidentally be level 11 by the time we reach the Mentellan Crux. We begin the relatively short jaunt to Medora's chamber inside the dungeon. Ironically, I think I'm more comfortable with the route to Medora than I am with any of the other main quest dungeons, aside from maybe Privateer's Hold. I think it's because every time you play through the story, you only have to do those dungeons one time, but you need to go to Medora 2 or 3 times every playthrough. In any case, vampires, liches, and ghosts, oh my. We make our way to Medora, making short work of the enemies we encounter on the way over. I mean, really, a single, normal lich? I've easily handled multiple ancient liches at this point. Please! We finish leveling to 8 and talk to Medora. She tells us to go to Shedungeon and grab a great unicorn horn from Nulfaga. Now, you might be tempted to set an anchor in here. I mean, she's so far into the dungeon, and it's such a pain to get to her after all. Don't do that. This room will trap you inside, and you'll need to reload an old save. Instead, come out to this room here. This room will cut out 95% of the running to and fro, and you'll still be able to leave the dungeon. Just beware. When you come right near the entrance, you'll have to frob this wheel, and then duck back into the last room while you wait for the wall to get out of your way. Alright, cool. Anchor in the dungeon, level 8 acquired, off to Shedungeon. Outside of the dungeon, we go shields up, with both spell resist and big shields, since we know we're facing spellcasters inside here. I'd rather not get silenced if I can help it. This time, I do tell the door to shut up, so we can try to speed this up a little. I also don't forget about the secret door this time, and after grabbing the great unicorn horn, we can teleport directly from Shedungeon to Direni. Medora thanks us and gives us a magical saber, which is nice of her. We identify it as a steel saber of venom spitting, which sounds really cool until you realize that all it does is increase our dragonish language skill. Now we have to wait before we can accept the next quest from Medora. We receive a letter from the Underking, which tells us to meet his representative in Sentinel, who then tells us to head to Ikalon for our next dungeon. We get a notification that our loan is due in only 3 more months. We set an anchor in front of the quest giver and travel north to Castle Lugwich. Continuing to use the spells we crafted at level 6, we demolish the orcs, centaurs, and vampires that stand in our way, grab the cursed item, and return to Sentinel. From here, we actually go to a smaller Sentinel city that has an inn so we can train up to level 9 before we head towards Wayrest to see if Baron Zaya will right us. Alright, so I actually did some research on that fuck-ass quest, and it's basically more complicated than I ever expected and requires you to go much further out of your way to do it than I ever could have anticipated. Long story short, we're going directly to level 10 and returning to Medora to start the final stretch. We get a vision from Medora, and she tells us to go to Orsinium and ask Gortwag about the Dust of Restful Death. Gortwag tells us that our dust is in another dungeon, and that this information comes at a cost that Medora will understand. While we're fighting enemies in this dungeon, I notice that our damaging spells that took nearly all of our magicka to cast before now only take 100, and oh my god, our destruction skill is 95. Not that I'm actually surprised by this, seeing as we cast them all the friggin' time. Now, a quick note. These spells were created at level 6, and at that time were designed to deal 211 damage apiece. Currently, at level 10, they deal 351. There's absolutely no practical purpose for us to push this damage any higher, but I'm gonna later. We are going to wait inside the dungeon for a month so that Medora can finish preparing the dust. When she's done, we're told to sprinkle the dust on Lysandus' corpse. Easy enough, since we know where his real tomb is. So we go there. And instead of being lost inside for multiple hours like last time, I remember this skull that I have to interact with to get to the part of the tomb that houses the body. Lots of zombies, lots of skeletons, lots of fodder for our already ridiculous spells. Lysandus' spirit is somewhat soothed by the dust, and he tells us about this Woodbourne guy and that we should probably do something about him. So it's off to Woodbourne Hall for us. Now, technically the lever pulling part of this dungeon is optional, since we can simply levitate up to where we want to go, but I like pulling levers, and it keeps us near the entrance of the dungeon so I can stuff my wagon full of random bullshit. We find our way to Woodbourne, kill him in a single spell which makes his dialogue boxes appear in the opposite order of what they're supposed to, and then we get the cutscene showing Lysandus' spirit leaving Daggerfall alone. With that, we've only got 2 quests remaining. I rest at the entrance of Woodbourne Hall, and I'm greeted with this. Apparently, we're now a master of destruction magic. That means we have a level of 100 skill. Our 351 damage attack now only costs us 62 magicka to use. The fireball we used at the very beginning now only costs us 7 magicka to use. And the absolute minimum that a spell will consume when it's cast is 5. Meaning that these spells are now real cheap. We travel to Daggerfall and get a letter from Briscienna. Hold on, lady, we've got some business to deal with. Now, who thinks we've saved up enough gold to pay off our loan? We took out a loan of 50,000 septims a little under a year ago, and we owe 10% interest on it. So that's 55,000 that we're gonna need to give to the bank. I'll be giving the answer in 3, 2, 1. Yeah, we kinda crushed it. Even after paying back the loan, we came away with 168,368 gold in liquid assets. I withdraw this as a letter of credit and set an anchor near Castle Daggerfall before I make my way to Briscienna, who decided to stay in Wayrest after all the nonsense that went down there. Briscienna tells us that we have to raid Castle Daggerfall if we want to get the Totem of Tiber Septim. So we do exactly that, making a huge commotion in the castle's common area because subtlety is a foreign concept to this Kalpa's iteration of Pleads for Mercy. Once we find our way to the actual dungeon part of the castle, it's a short trip to the vault. The totem speaks to us, and as soon as we're out, we decide who we're going to give it to. Honestly, I'm still tempted to give it to Edwyr, but honestly, all of the nobles are such dicks, and I kinda don't want to give it to any of them. You know what? Fuck it. Mannimarco gets the totem. Black soul gems for everybody. But still, fuck these ancient witches. Now that we've given the totem up, Nulfaga will contact us via hallucination and let us know that it's time to go to the Mantellin Crux. We'll go in just a bit. I'd want to see what kind of nonsense we can get up to at the Mages Guild. As we walk in, we receive a notification. You have been promoted to Enchanter. And that's when I formed a plan. A devious little plan. At 100 destruction, with the maximum possible spell points of 300, we can completely max out the damage on an area at range spell. This spell, when it connects, will currently do 1100 damage and will continue to get stronger with us. That's absolutely mind-blowing. Unfortunately, mind-blowing is nothing special to an individual who has achieved Kim. We're going to go into overdrive. We've completely manhandled Daggerfall at this point. We've made a joke of the nobility, we've broken into every single one of their castles and stolen their treasures, we've killed hundreds of guards, undead, and wildlife. We've decimated their plans for the future, and we're just about ready to blow this popsicle stand of a dimension and ascend to a higher plane. We're high level now, with only one quest remaining. I think it's time we got some customized enchantments going. What, you didn't think a discussion about OP magic in an Elder Scrolls game was going to skimp out on the enchanting, did you? In order to enchant equipment, you need to be an enchanter with the Mages Guild. It's actually quite a high rank, so it typically takes quite a few side quests to be allowed to enchant gear. In our case, however, giving the totem to Mannimarco increased our reputation with them enough to simply get the rank practically for free. Practically speaking, what this means is two things. Thing the first, we need to gather up some equipment. You may notice that I've been practically naked this entire run, because, frankly, armor isn't necessary for our character. What you may not have noticed are the slots to the left of the character. These are also equipment slots, but typically for us they're empty because there's not much that's worth equipping to them. Randomized magical loot tends to favor something that goes on the body, in my experience. So we're going to be scouring stores we otherwise wouldn't give the time of day to for very specific pieces of equipment. We spend a little time shopping. I looked for a couple of diamonds, but I have a hunch they're about as rare to find in shops as Daedric equipment. Not that we need any Daedric equipment. We're actually not going to be using any Daedric stuff. What we're going to be doing instead is finding amulets, bracers, bracelets, marks, and rings. We want these items specifically because while we may be able to equip things like torques, cloth amulets, and ambers, they don't have as much enchanting power. Since we can't find diamonds, I decided to forego crystals altogether. Though, honestly, what we're doing is already going to be overkill. Thing the second, we must trap some ancient lich souls. This isn't technically necessary, but I'm doing it for a reason. For our purposes, revisiting Mannimarco and slaying the two in his throne room does the trick well enough. Repeat that a few times, and we've got 12 ancient lich souls trapped in our inventory. Souls in hand, we return to the enchanter, and let's begin our final lesson, achieving Kim. So, as you can see here, we can select a piece of gear to enchant. When we've selected one, you'll see exactly how much magical energy we can enchant on that piece of gear. So far, this should be familiar if you've played something like Morrowind or Oblivion. On the left, we can add powers. These are positive effects. We can put certain castable spells or other effects onto the equipment. What we're interested in is the Enhances Skill power. These will fortify any skill that we have by 15 points. So, a skill with 65 will be boosted to 80 while this is worn. Importantly, this does not cause the equipment to degrade, as something like the Ring of Khajiit would do. But oh no, look, we only have room for like 2 effects. Never fear, the other column, the one with side effects, allows you to choose downsides that will allow you to put even more positive effects on your equipment. These include things like making the equipment heavy or making it damage you under certain conditions. These negative effects will subtract from the amount of enchantment points that are currently on a given item. But man, isn't it just a pain in the ass having to deal with all those negative effects? I mean, we have a decent strength score, but we're not exactly Eddie Hall. This is why we soulbound the ancient liches. You see, soulbound is another condition that will subtract from our enchantment points. This is supposed to be balanced out by the fact that if/when the equipment breaks, the soulbound enemy will bust out and try to kill you. Take for example the sword we used to restore our magicka over the course of the run. Every time we cast that spell, the weapon degraded a little bit, and since it's magical, by default we aren't able to repair it. This is true for any weapon or piece of armor that we choose. However, none of the enchantments we choose will cause the items to degrade. Now, it's worth noting that a lot of souls will have other effects built onto them. Regular liches, for example, will make the enchanted item deteriorate in sunlight, but also natively boosts destruction by 15 points. I chose Ancient Liches specifically to avoid any unwanted side effects. They're also the third most powerful soul, right behind Daedra Lords, which also carries some negative effects, and a Dragonling specific to a Knightly Order quest. This is a single finished item, plus 15 to our Alteration, Destruction, Thaumaturgy, increased maximum spell points during the spring and summer, and then some other effect to fill out the last few points. I did this for 7 items, fortifying my Destruction to 205, Alteration to 158, and Thaumaturgy to 170. I also enchanted a few others with Restoration, Illusion, Mysticism, just to bring those costs down a little bit. Our lowest level magical skill at this point is Restoration, at 89. Wow, would you look at that? Almost all of our spells only cost 5 magicka now. So what kind of spells can we make with these amazing stats? Well, for one, we can make an AoE damaging spell with 3 instances of maxed out damage on it. Hell, let's make 2 different flavors again, why not? I believe that having 3 damaging effects on our spells forces 3 separate saves on our enemies, which should hopefully reduce the number of times we have to shoot at them. I also created a Disintegrate spell based on that same principle, but truth be told, I don't know if that changes anything. The other big thing that we can do is make ourselves just actually invincible. This spell will give us a full-on, real-life hour of 1100% spell reflection, in addition to a shield that will last for the same amount of time and protect us from a whopping 1100 damage. And, just for shits and giggles, I added a spell resistance effect. Who cares? It still only costs 5 magicka. Oh, and by the way, while all of this is only costing 5 magicka, we're actually sitting on 1200 spell points now. No longer do we have to worry about whether we're close enough to absorb the spell ourselves. Now we just fire away, killing anyone and everything that dares to even kind of look at us funny. I think we're ready now. Let's talk to Nulfaga and sort Ulzurin out. We start by making ourselves invincible. 1146 effective health, 1100 spell reflect, and 1100 spell resist. Then, we begin our conquest. We tell the statue to shut up and melt the 2 mages in Nulfaga's chamber. We speak to her and are transported to the location of the Third Era Mantellan massacre. I think that the multiple damage effects are working as intended, because it became exceedingly rare for enemies to survive more than 1 hit. We open the doors, teleport to the pyramid, kill the Lich and all the vampires, say hi to Benefactor, and descend to the pyramid's innards. We come out to the mountain again, and this time I just jump down to where the levers are. Opening the doors leads to levers, which opens another door that contains a teleporter. This transports us to a room with many doors, most of which we ignore so that we can go downstairs and murder a bunch of orcs. The fire room, the room of the blind god, is one of my favorites. We kill all of the fire Daedra with a single spell. This is the most powerful I've ever felt in an Elder Scrolls game. Just about the only thing that I can't do, that I wish I could, is increase the speed of my levitation, so that I could have thrown that onto my invincibility spell instead of a redundant spell resistance. We climb into the Blind God's Eye and answer the Black Skull's question. This puts us into the final gauntlet. We free the giant sword, kill every Daedra Lord in the room, we kill so many fire Daedra and ghosts, we kill an ancient vampire, and then we clasp eyes on the Mantella itself. We approach the gem and touch it. As we do, Pleads for Mercy II breaks free of his mortal coil. His mortal form will continue to wander High Rock, but this lizard is rising to a higher plane. With that, we once again read fate as it shall be written on the Elder Scrolls, and complete our Daggerfall run. I want to thank everybody for 1,000 subscribers, and thanks to everybody who watched, liked, and shared the first Daggerfall video. The overwhelmingly positive reception is what really motivated me to get this second one out as quickly as I did. Friends of mine know how slow I am to work on videos, even when I'm passionate about the topic. If you liked this one, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, as I've got many more Daggerfall runs waiting to be made reality. Have a good one, and thank you again.